everyone, and welcome back to another Canyon Conversations with Stokes Nature Center. Today we are joined by Charlotte Bishop, who is a senior projects manager with KSAT, which is a satellite company based out of Tromsø, Norway. Hello, Charlotte. How are you all the way out in Norway?
Hey, Patrick. Nice to see you.
Excellent. Well, thank you so much for joining us and being able to talk about all the work that KSAT is doing. We're sad that we don't get to see you again this year for SmallSat conference here in Logan, but very happy that we can communicate thanks to the power of satellites and undersea cables and all those amazing technological avenues that you deal with.
Yeah, absolutely. It's definitely a shame. We're very much looking forward to the time where we can actually come and see people in person again and come back to some of these great conferences that we're used to attending.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, just to get us started, I'd like you just to introduce yourself to, all the viewers. So who are you? How did you come to work at KSAT? It doesn't sound like you're from Norway. So how did you kind of arrive here from, I'm assuming, one of the former British colonies?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So, hi everyone. I'm Charlotte. I'm a senior project manager at KSAT. I am British. I've lived in Norway now for 3 years. Definitely a big change for me. I've worked in remote sensing, so the science of how we interpret satellite data, for nearly 15 years now, and spent most of my time in the UK doing the same kind of thing that I do here. But I really wanted an opportunity to do something different, and the opportunity came up at KSAT. And I never imagined working in another country at all. That was never on my radar, but I thought, why not? And I took the kind of leap of faith to move to North Norway and deal with 24-hour daylight and darkness for 2 months of the year, respectively, and try something different. And I'm so pleased I did. It's a fantastic opportunity. But I can tell you a little bit about what I do here. So my role as a project manager is not just about kind of the more admin side of managing a project as some project managers might have. It's actually working with customers to help them understand how satellite data can help them. So in some cases, that's educating our customers as to what satellite imagery does, and there's so much variety of satellite data, and I'm sure we'll probably come on to that, it's sometimes difficult for the customer to understand what's really going to be of benefit to them. So I work closely with them to help them understand. I have a very technical background, so that helps them, build confidence with the type of solution that we then propose. And then I work with them throughout the project timeline to ensure that the project and the service that we provide meets their requirements, and also is obviously delivered on time and meets their various specifications. So we have different types of project managers at KSAT because we have 2 different sides to the business. So maybe I'll tell you a little bit about who KSAT is as well. So KSAT is part of Kongsberg and also partly owned by Space Norway, but runs as an independent entity within that group. So KSAT itself provides the world's largest ground station. So that means that we talk to satellites through this global network of satellite dishes. And we don't own any satellites ourselves. So we have built relationships with all of these satellite providers that are, launch all these amazing tools that are up in space, some of which we're using directly within the Earth Observation Division, which is where I work. So the Earth Observation team is actually taking that data and analyzing it and adding value to that data, which basically means we're adding like an extra layer of information. Maybe we're doing some processing to pull out information on the environment, as we're going to talk about today, or perhaps on pollution or on ship detection or on something else. It's really quite varied, the types of things and services that we provide. And the value, I guess the benefit of the work we do at KSAT, and because of the ground station, is we can also deliver data quite quickly. So when, from a satellite operator's point of view, they have the opportunity to get the data quickly from the satellite to their processing, and we have the ability to take the data and add some value to it and deliver quickly to a customer. So it's really quite nice to be part of the chain, because at previous roles I've had, we've done the service provision side, but we haven't had the virtue of the quick access to data, which we know is really important for many of the customers that we work with. So yes, it's quite wide and varied, but yeah, that's a little bit at least about what I do.
That sounds very complex and at times a little complicated maybe, but
I'm happy to simplify it as needed.
No, that sounds really, really great. You know, that's a really unique job, being able to have access and provide your clients access to these data where they're able to look at Earth from above and really see unique features of the planet that, you know, we just don't get down here on ground level. So my next question for you is, what are some things which first surprised you when you began your work, or continue to surprise you in terms of either, you know, the logistics or the data themselves and the quality and kind of what is being captured and what different entities are potentially interested in terms of data?
Yeah, that's a great question. I guess the first answer to that is that there always seems to be something new. It's either new in technology, or it's new in terms of how we are developing and adapting to customers' needs, but also as part of that, new markets are coming with interest that, you know, probably 10 years ago we wouldn't have thought of. So I think it's the scope, I think, of Earth observation data to support so many applications is really wide, and I think that that's what kind of gets me excited about going to work every day. There's always something different. The type of projects we do vary a lot, so there's never something where you're stuck, or not stuck, but, you know, you're focused on doing the same thing for a long time. You have the flexibility to do, you know, one day you might be doing something on offshore wind farms, and then the next day you might be doing something on land cover, and, you know, there's quite a lot of diversity in the types of applications and also customers, and also within those customer sectors. So we work a lot with government groups, some of whom are extremely well versed and educated in terms of how satellite data can be used for their applications, but also many of them that don't know where to start. And so working with them to, you know, strike that balance between what technology they really need to meet their application, as well as you know, something that meets their budget or other requirements that they might have. And sometimes that can be challenging, but the benefit is, I think, that with so many satellites that we have now circulating the Earth that come into this more Earth observation, so the more imaging style satellites that are similar to what we see in Google Earth, for example, rather than some of the other systems that are more focused on communications or Internet of Things and other terms that you may hear that also have satellites. It's you know, there are so many different types out there, and they have different scales in terms of, you know, local scale to larger scale, and also different archives. We can look back in the archives for some 40, 50 years with some satellites, which is quite incredible to think about the type of information that you can gather by just dipping back into the archive and seeing how things change. So your point about perspective is exactly that. I mean, to see anything from a bird's eye view is quite unique, but to be able to kind of track changes over that and get a very different perspective to someone on the ground, but also be able to provide value to that person on the ground, who's, you know, maybe taking that information and you know, actioning something on the intelligence that it provides. So, I mean, we see a growth in markets, for example, within engineering, oil and gas, as I say, government users, defense users, environmental, of course, as well, and that therefore kind of widens that reach even further to insurance, market intelligence even, and commodities, and supply chain companies are interested in satellite data to supplement the information that they gather from other sources as well. So it doesn't answer every question by itself, but I think that the power of being able to combine it with other data really is quite unique in terms of the value it can have.
Yeah, that's really, really fascinating. Just the ability for all these complex layers to come together across different parties to really kind of make your own data that you're seeking. So if you're seeking, data set X, you're like, we can do that. We just got to combine, these different elements to create that. And, different people are interested in different things in different localities, which I'm sure is also a big part of your, someone may be interested in deforestation in the Congo and someone may be interested in deforestation in the Amazon. And it's not just a lift and plop in those two different areas. It's like, all right, we gotta deal with this in a unique way.
And exactly. Sometimes there's like a tailored approach. Sometimes there's something we might have that's off the shelf, so more ready to go, and then other times there is something that maybe we need to work with that user, or perhaps other parties in that country or region, or other suppliers that we know can help provide more of the information that customer needs at that time. So I think that's what's quite exciting, that it allows you to kind of engage with multiple different types of users, but also other suppliers. Working with different satellite operators is quite interesting. They have a typically quite different approach in some respects, but also similar in many others. And so it's quite, I just find it really fascinating to be able to think of all the different ways that we can help a customer and present. Sometimes, as you mentioned at the start, sometimes they kind of can come across quite complex solutions, but helping them understand what those solutions will add value to for them is kind of part of the role that we have, through that inquiry phase and more like a consultative phase where we help them understand what's possible.
Yeah, and with that, I'd like to pivot a little bit to the tracking of deforestation work that KSAT has been doing. And I know KSAT is involved in looking at deforestation across different ecosystems and within different forests. Can you tell us a little bit about those data and, the deforestation work that you all are doing to try and track?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So in September 2020, KSAT was awarded a contract by the Norwegian Ministry of Climate and Environment through NICFI, which is the Norwegian, I have to read this so I don't get it wrong, Norway's International Climate and Forestry Initiative, or NICFI, to provide this data. So essentially, Norway was paying for access to the data for it to then be made available to anyone, under the premise of it being used to support activities towards reducing the risk of deforestation, reversing the loss of tropical forests, biodiversity, climate change, and sustainable development around land use applications. So what this does, and what KSAT does with its partners Planet and Airbus, who are satellite data providers, is serve this data to users that sign up to the program. It's a free to sign up program, providing access across this vast area, 45 million square kilometers area, across the global tropical forest region, where every month we have a new mosaic, so a combined image product that covers this whole area. That anyone who just signs up to the program, accepts that these license terms, which are related to forestry and deforestation, can use this data, can download it, can analyze it, and derive products from it. So the type of data we're talking about is better than 5-meter spatial resolution. And the reason why this is a little bit different is because this data is commercial. So it's different to the data that people have been using previously for forestry mapping, which has been public, so free to use data. But the commercial data being available on this scale is really unprecedented. This is the first time anything like this has ever been done, not just in forests, just in general. To have the kind of service that we have available here, where we at KSAT with our partners, we're providing the data and the users are doing the analysis, but we're working with the users through the outreach that we're doing to promote the program, to generate the resources, to help understand their needs, what's stopping them from using the data and how can we enable them better. Because the whole point of this program, and a very big part of Norway's reason behind doing this, was to reduce the barriers to access to data. Licensing and pricing of satellite data is typically quite complex to understand, particularly if you're not familiar with how satellite data works. So we wanted to remove those, have something that's as easy to access as possible, that anyone can sign up to, that's open to as many users as possible, including commercial entities, as long as it's within the bounds of the license and not in pursuit of profit. So they can still use it for research and development, and those NGOs, governments and other research applications can use this data across. We've had activities around illegal mining, supply chain monitoring, so they can monitor the sustainability around palm oil plantations, for example. And also obviously just general deforestation, understanding the deforestation in particular regions. And by virtue of having this bird's eye view, you get a different perspective than you would if you were just on the ground, and particularly in some of these very remote areas where access to data would be very limited. Even access on the ground is sometimes very limited. So how can we make this more accessible? And I mean, it's a really something quite unique in terms of what this program is set to achieve. And it's been wonderful to see some of the use cases that have already come out from using the data. We're heading towards nearly a year of the program now. We have 6,500 users using this data already, and that's growing. The program runs for another 4 years, another 3 years, 4 years in total, as it stands today. And we expect that user usage to increase, of course, as people become more familiar. And we get requests, I would say, almost daily for more information about how to access or how they can integrate the data. And so working with those users to understand their challenges and then provide associated support to help them, and then also working with them to see how they're using it and actually get them to showcase to us their user story, as we would say, to give us those, to share with us their case examples, either publicly or otherwise, just so that we can understand the many and varied applications. We have everyone from a small user who only has a very small area to look at, to even media, of course, media interest in the work that this is providing, and raising public awareness. So one of the big advantages of the program is actually making the data available, at least in some form, publicly. So we have some sites where the data can be accessed publicly by anyone in a view only, so you can still explore and visualize the data. And then for those users who need a little bit more of a deep dive, they can sign up to the program and actually download that data and use it with their own data sets and in combination with their own products to give them more information than they've had previously.
That sounds really great. That sounds like, it'd be really great for, like you mentioned, commercial interests, NGOs, nonprofits, and also academic work, and maybe those that are just, they need a new hobby and they're curious. They want to do a deep dive into deforestation satellite data. Well, do you have any stories that you're able to tell about, what findings that these users have come back and reported to KSAT to be able
Yeah.
to say like, hey, this is something really cool that we found because we had access to these data?
Yeah, we have some really nice examples, and some of which I can talk about here. They've been presented already publicly. So we have some examples from Indonesia, where we have an environmental group there who've been using the satellite data to help their on-the-ground investigations of deforestation. So they've used some of the other lower resolution alert information that also comes from satellite, but come from these much coarser, less detailed resolution data that will give an indication of potential areas of deforestation, but they don't give the full picture of the extent and area. And that's important for estimations of really the volume of forest that's being lost, and obviously this is a major issue and has significant impact on the climate. So they've been doing quite a lot of work in that area and provided some really nice examples which show how they have integrated the data from the NICFI data program along with these deforestation alerts, and then they use those in Google Earth in the field that they can use through a mobile app, and then they can go and check those spots themselves, understand a bit more about what's happening on the ground, and add a little bit more context. And we have similar stories like that in other areas as well, Peru, Colombia, Brazil, and many other locations using a similar kind of approach to that. And also areas where we have users who are using the data and combining that with forest fire information. So where there have been largely natural, but often sometimes human-induced fires, how they can track that. They can track the changes over the monthly mosaics that we have, but also then track the damage that causes, because of course the regeneration of those forests takes a very long time. So understanding the area that is impacted is also of great interest. And finally, I just wanted to touch on an example where we have a supply chain private sector user who is using this data to help support their zero deforestation goals. And they are taking the data as well as combining that with other information they have on the ground, just to give them better reporting information. It's higher cadence, so higher repeat imagery. So they're getting it more often. It's in more detail. It allows them therefore to report with more accuracy and more detail than they've been able to do previously. And this is a common theme that we've seen with users, and the feedback that we've had is how useful the data is to give them more context, to help better improve their models. We have one user who's been using this data to help improve their land cover classification algorithms, so they can track those changes automatically on a month-to-month basis over the areas of interest. So really quite wide and diverse use cases, but all centered around, of course, the focus of trying to reduce deforestation and improve the monitoring of that. And also we've had some recent outreach with indigenous populations as well. How can we enable them better? Typically they come from areas where perhaps bandwidth to physically download data is also more limited. So working with them and discussing with them what those limitations are, and helping them to find a way that they can still make use of the data for their region and for the territory that they occupy is also important. So it's kind of the larger scale NGOs and the private companies all the way down to the people on the ground, managing their own small holdings and such like. It is designed for everyone, and even you and me on the ground, just having a little look around and explore. I think it's raising awareness as much of anything as really how significant the changes we see on this kind of monthly cadence of changes of imagery, and you do see some really significant changes, and many of which are not reported. And so having satellite imagery to help validate other information is really useful as part of building a picture of how things are changing.
Yeah, absolutely. You know, those are some really, really great case stories that you have there. And yeah, the diversity of how people are using these data too is also really great everywhere, from the supply chain with the palm oil producer making sure they're meeting their goals, to the indigenous populations, you know, making sure that perhaps treaty rights aren't being infringed upon. So that's really excellent. I'm sure, you know, KSAT is just a little bit of pun intended over the moon about, you know, just the use of these data. My next question is, are there any other, you know, this, as you mentioned at the beginning, this is a project within a department within the organization. Yeah. KSAT is not just, you know, deforestation monitoring. Are there other monitoring projects or other applications of KSAT data that, you know, are really interesting to you, and that can also help support these same challenges that we're facing in terms of, you know, deforestation has a direct, I would say at least correlation, if not causation, to, you know, we're not able to capture as much carbon, therefore our carbon footprint and XYZ continuing down that feedback loop. Are there any other projects that KSAT uses in terms of monitoring or data capture that can help contribute to solving these global questions or these global challenges?
Yeah, absolutely. And KSAT has quite a diverse portfolio of the types of services that it provides, and so it's kind of hard to focus on just a few, but I think there's some that naturally lend itself to what you're talking about here, in terms of, I guess, global impact and climate change and other, I guess, larger scale programs and initiatives that many of us are aware of are big problems. So I guess one of those, we have a few of those both on land and on the ocean. So firstly, I guess one of the big projects and products that KSAT provides is related to oil spill detection, and we serve a lot of customers with that type of product, but of course, what's most relevant, I think, from an environmental perspective is, of course, the pollution element. And that could be related to vessels, of course, or also to rigs or other installations. And in the event of an emergency, of course, that information is critically important to understand the potential impacts into environmentally sensitive areas, and also, you know, potentially other just general context and understanding of the spread of oil. And we have different, there are certain types of satellite data that are particularly good, allowing us to see oil on the sea surface. And so this is really useful for us when we're responding to an emergency. We can provide data quickly through our ground stations and also then deliver that very quickly to the customer. And we typically do a lot of reporting in the case of an emergency. Of course, we hope emergencies like that don't happen very often, but we can provide imagery sometimes multiple times a day, depending on where the area is. That can provide then a time series of how that slick is changing, how it's drifting, perhaps the thickness of the oil, depending on the type of imagery that we're looking at. And that can give really useful information for the people on the boats or the facilities, or as part of the cleanup operation, to help them understand where the impact may potentially hit the coastline, or also at the very least help them with their mitigation methods in terms of the dispersal of the oil and the cleanup process. So that's an area we do quite a lot of extensive work with. We also use satellite data to support, say, illegal fishing. We know there's a lot of problem with overfishing. So through some of the work we do with ship detection, we're also expanding that research into and operational activities into illegal fishing, and how to better support the IUU fishing and regulations to ensure that we're providing information that's beneficial, that can be acted upon quickly. We've also been working around marine plastics. This is, of course, a global issue, a huge one that we see a lot about in the press. So we conducted a research project with a number of other partners last year, where we had a vessel out in the Pacific, and we were working with a number of other analysts and data providers to collect as much data as we could over what was really a very large area, and trying to see essentially what we could see from imagery. Detecting plastics in the ocean from space is quite challenging. From closer to the coastline, it becomes a little bit easier for reasons I will not go into right now. But in the middle of the ocean, it can be quite difficult. So we were looking at ways that we could deploy different techniques to analyze the data, and subsequently that this led into a master's program. So we've had a student who's just finished, in fact, her research for that, and where she's taken higher, very detailed data to less detailed data, and just looked at the types of information that you can extract to see if there's a common approach, or a more common approach that we could use to find and develop something that could be repeatable. I think that the outcomes we found really were largely that there's more validation that is needed, as is often the case with research. We need as much data as possible, but it's really interesting to see the advancements in this topic in particular. And we know a European Space Agency has recently funded some projects on this topic. So I think we will see much more in this space, and it's really interesting for us to be able to see what's possible from the data, and sometimes just to take a small research project and spend some time analysing the data and seeing how we can answer some of these questions, which I think is a really great thing that we do at KSAT, where we can spend some time doing some research and seeing how we can best support some perhaps variable customers than our usual wide customer base. And then I guess if we move to the land, we do quite a lot of applications on land, more focused around kind of land cover and land use change and change detection. So not, I guess, directly related to what we're talking about with forest mapping, but of course the same thing would apply there. It's more around I guess general land cover in more variable terrain areas, where we're providing broad analysis of different land cover classes, and then that can be updated and tailored. And those types of products are normally bespoke to a customer's requirements, but can of course then be deployed in many different areas and at many different scales depending on the requirements. So yes, I guess the answer to your question is yes, we do lots of other monitoring things, and those are just an example of some of the types of monitoring that we do.
That's really fantastic that KSAT has such a suite, and it's not just the one-off deforestation project. It's, like you mentioned, the oil spill detection, which we're very familiar with oil spills here in the United States, and unfortunately. And looking at, ocean plastics, like you said, which, all these issues which we hear about on the fringe, but we're often disengaged from. You all are actually engaging with those, and you're going through the labor to be able to detect these issues so that we can actually find solutions. And it gives you a little bit of hope that, that we'll be able to solve these problems. So that's, if nothing else, we have hope because there's been the industry and the labor and all the folks doing the work and crunching the numbers, and I'm sure stressing.
Sometimes, yes, and I think that you're quite right. I think that's what it comes down to, actually having the time to dedicate. It's quite unusual, I would say, in a company versus research to have have time to dedicate to research. And we don't for sure have the time all the time to do that, but it's really nice to have the opportunity when perhaps a pilot project comes up, such as this marine plastics one that we were working on. And also it allows us, just through, as technology changes, allows us to incorporate some of these new technologies around machine learning and AI, and see how we can upgrade the services that we already have, that are existing, and how we can improve those with the new knowledge and new capabilities that come out, either through knowledge from personnel, as well as, of course, knowledge from, as technology has grown and everything around machine learning and such like. But they take such a lot of data, which is something that we have quite a lot of, at least of some types of data. So it's really fantastic to be able to use some of the data that's already flown through our processing chain, and be able to then repurpose that as training data for the same kind of purposes, but to refine the information that we're providing to customers, and also quicker access to data. And that's something we see quite a lot in terms of improving decision making for users. They want data quicker, they probably want it yesterday. So how do we improve the process? And I think this goes for everyone within our community in terms of considerations around how to improve that data flow, whether it's cloud processing, cloud delivery, and all these other concepts that you will have come across. And that's something that we spend a lot of time in research on our side as well, to ensure that we stay up to date, and also can adapt very quickly to customers' needs as much as possible, where it has a kind of wider impact on our general customer base. And then, of course, there will always be exceptions for more tailored solutions that we will accommodate or we do accommodate as much as possible. So it's many and varied, definitely.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, my last question is, talking about all this amazing work that KSAT is doing, if a young person wants to get into this field to make these differences, if they're really engaged in, I really care about deforestation or I really care about ocean plastics, or even I really care about data and I love spreadsheets, but I also love space. I'm sure you also do with a lot of spreadsheets. How does someone get engaged in this field? How does someone come to work for KSAT? I guess, what's your little bit of a life journey, how you got here, in terms of your educational regimen, in terms of serendipity, what was chance and what was, good old hard work and grit, and how can other people follow in your footsteps?
Great question. Okay, yes. So I did not even know remote sensing was a career path. So when I went to university, I did geography. But I'll say right now, I think there are so many different degrees that can end up in doing what we do at KSAT or similar companies. So you don't necessarily have to have a geography or a physics or type of degree. I think a lot of it also comes down to passion and enthusiasm to learn, and perhaps go through training to build up expertise. But yes, my background was geography. I was initially intending to be a teacher, and then decided I didn't want to do that. And my tutor at the time suggested, maybe you would be interested in doing this, because he'd kind of asked the things that I'd enjoyed in our geography. And we did one module on remote sensing. I had never heard of it. We only did 6 weeks, like a small course thing on it. But I thought, well, that's kind of different. I've never come across that before. And so he suggested that, well, if you are interested, then you could do a master's in it. So I decided to do that. And I took a year out between doing that. And in that time, I started working as a temp, just in a company that, funnily enough, was 15 miles from my house, that did analysis from satellite data, so a little bit serendipitous for sure. And I worked there for most of that year before I did my master's, so I started to get a better idea of how this worked in practice, and particularly within commercial industry, and I was still very interested to learn more. So I did the master's. I ended up going back to the same company. I worked there for 12 years and did the same kind of thing, as I say, that I do at KSAT. So worked with lots of different types of data, building algorithms, and then as time went on, adding responsibility of managing some of these projects as I do today. And then, yeah, KSAT kind of came a little bit out of nowhere. I knew KSAT. I'd been working with them at my previous role. They were a partner on a project we were working on. So I'd visited to Tromsø a few times, but only for a couple of days, and it was dark, and I really wanted to see the Northern Lights, and I didn't get to see them. I was really disappointed. And I just, yeah, I was at that point where I was interested to find another role. And so a colleague here at KSAT said, "Oh, we have a position. Why don't you apply?" And so I did. And then, I don't know, 4 months later or something, I was moving to the Arctic, and it was daylight because it was the middle of the year by this point, and it looked very, very different than it did in the winter. So yeah, it was a very interesting path, but perhaps not as varied as some. And I think I definitely feel that I was quite lucky with the company that I worked with initially. They were very encouraging for training, for joining some of these organizations, encouraged you, but also myself through my own kind of initiative to take on some responsibility for my own kind of future development. And I signed up to lectures. I'd go, and there's, at least in London, they have quite a lot of public lectures. Different organizations will run, and they have networking sessions afterwards. So being able to go and meet other people, go and chat to other people. There are lots of communities out there around the world that do remote sensing, or even that are within that field or touch into that field, that I really encourage anyone who's interested to reach out to people. I think it's super scary to do that initially, but we speak a lot to people who are, you know, just about to start their career path, or perhaps still at university, and many of us in the industry as a whole are happy to share. You know, if someone reaches out to us on LinkedIn, or chats to us at a conference, I'm very happy to share how I got to doing what I'm doing, but also how they could also take part. And my answer is almost always the same. Sign up to some of these organizations that they have. Some of them will have free events. Go along, meet some other people, and also take some initiative to think about the things that are of interest to you. And you don't need to be a specialist in all parts of remote sensing or Python or all types of coding to have a job in this industry. And it's a lot about passion and also interest to learn more, particularly at that graduate level. And then even if you're a little bit beyond that and you're looking for a change in role, it's coming with something. What does your previous experience bring to the community that we have, and also playing around with data. There's so much free data out there, free software access. I think we're so lucky now to have the access that we do, and a lot of organizations that provide support to students, that it's really a great time to get your hands dirty with some of this and start playing around and ask questions. Definitely always ask questions along the way.
Excellent. Well, that's such a great story. It sounds like, you had your serendipitous path, but you also spent a lot of time stitching your boots and making sure that you could actually walk that path and not, run into those barriers. So Charlotte, it's been so nice to speak to you and to talk about all the good work that KSAT is doing with their remote monitoring and the deforestation and their other projects. looking forward to hopefully seeing you next year out here in Logan for Small Sat. But until then, tusen takk out there in Tromsø, and hopefully we'll see you in person next year.
Thanks so much, Patrick. Fantastic to talk to you, and yeah, look forward to being there next time.
All right, thanks.
Take care.